Today on The State of Us, a millennial puzzle. They're more segregated than in the past, and the new rules of housing to buy or rent. The racial and ethnic diversity of millennials has been widely remarked upon since the term was coined to describe people born in the 1980s and 1990s. The demographic diversity, though, of young millennials is reflected in their views, yet not by where they live, according to a new piece from the Wall Street Journal. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal and the senior resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance Jackson.
Got an interesting one today. They are a more diverse population, right, than any other generation, yet their living choices make them less diverse. That's an interesting concept. And then the age-old question, rent or buy, which is better? We read a lot and we see a lot, a lot on television about how, you have to buy and wealth and, when you're talking about a place to live. But is that true? Is it just true now? Is it true in every aspect? So some interesting questions as we talk about places that people choose to live and how they choose to do it.
So, we'll also talk about in the back half of the show, the housing market and the new rules around housing, like how it's now timing over location. You might say, I thought location was, the master of all.
Now I still think it's location. So we'll have to, have to discuss that.
We'll have to get into it. But let's start with millennials being more segregated. Millennials born in the early 1990s are at odds with the description of being a demographic bridge to America's diverse culture. As adults, they've settled into more segregated neighborhoods than preceding generations. Residential segregation among young people increased rather than decreased from 2010 to 2019, according to new findings from the University of California. Frey's Research, who's one of the researchers who worked on the study, defined millennials as the cohort born between 1981 and 1997. Pew Research Center has used 1981 to 1996, and Merriam-Webster says anyone born in the 1980s or 1990s. But by any age cutoff, millennials are more racially diverse than the population at large. Based on census data for people born from 1981 to 1995, millennials are about 55% white, compared with 63% of Gen X and 71% of baby boomers. Millennials are about 21% Hispanic, compared with 16% in Generation X and 11% for baby boomers. The Asian and Black populations are also slightly larger for millennials. Young millennials are slightly more diverse than older millennials. The racial diversity of millennials appears to be reflected in the generation's political views. For example, a majority of millennials, 53%, say that interracial marriage is a good thing, compared with only 30% of baby boomers. Only 4% of millennials say that interracial marriage is a bad thing, compared with 10% of baby boomers. The remainder of both groups said that it doesn't make a difference. For millennials, 61% say increasing racial diversity is good for the country, compared with 52% of Gen Xers and 48% of boomers. So from all this, Lance, one might assume that this generation would also be more integrated residentially, as the early millennials were at the time of the 2010 census. That was the hypothesis that two researchers set out to test, and they recognized that millennials were diverse by many measures, but also knew that residential segregation has been such a long-standing, durable phenomenon.
By just being alive, they are more diverse, right? Their existence. They're not just living and breathing, they're diverse. But now in their housing, they've taken a step backwards since the last census. I think there's a lot of reasons for that has nothing to do with discrimination or diversity at all, as far as where they're living. But people can do what they want with that. The numbers are still, I was impressed. Okay, when it talked about interracial marriage, that the numbers were as close with each generation.
You thought they'd be bigger spreads.
I figured more millennials would think it was a good thing. That number seemed low to me.
Right.
That is barely over half.
Well, I mean, I guess when you take the fact that it's, 53% say that it's good, 4% say that it's bad. So the remaining, 43%
don't care one way or the other.
Say that it doesn't make a difference.
Still, that's low for millennials.
Yeah? You would have thought it'd be higher?
Yeah. And I think it's a little, I would have thought the baby boomer acceptance level would have been higher than that. Both of those numbers are low. I would have thought the acceptance of it would be higher than that.
Well, but it's hard because I guess it's not exactly a measure of acceptance, right? Because you could contend that people in the indifferent camp accept it. They don't have a problem with it, but they don't think it's good or bad inherently. It's just, it is what it is. Let's look though at what we're seeing. So, I mean, these are their views, but what about how they're actually living? Because you would think that the views would indicate that they would live in less segregated areas, not more. In 2000, the average segregation index of neighborhoods inhabited by 25 to 29-year-olds was 19. That's out of a possible 100. 0 would indicate no segregation. 100 would indicate maximum segregation. So in the year 2000, 25 to 29-year-olds were at 19. That's not particularly bad. I mean, obviously it can be better, but okay. By 2010, the average index of people of that age, which would be older millennials, had dropped to 16. So it had gotten better. And then by 2019, the average index of people of that age, which would be young millennials, had risen to 22. So we started at 19, went down to 16, and then went up to 22. And that all happened, folks, over the course of 2 decades. Another segregation metric is the variance ratio index. In the year 2000, the average young white adult, who would have been a Gen Xer at the time, lived in a neighborhood that was 21 percentage points more white than we would expect if young white and non-white adults were distributed evenly across all neighborhoods. That gap narrowed to about 18.5 percentage points in 2010. So again, from 2000 to 2010, in the first decade of this millennia, we saw it improve. But by 2019, it had widened to 24 percentage points. So again, it had gotten worse in the last 10 years. These indexes all tell a similar story. Young millennials are living in significantly more segregated neighborhoods than older millennials and Gen Xers did at the same age. So what is going on?
I'm going to blow this whole show out of the water right now. Probably won't even make the air. Is this really a thing? I mean, who's spending taxpayer dollars to figure this, to come up with this? I think it's crap. It's like you're living where you can afford to live, right? Or does it speak to a broader level and it's not millennials? Is this inherent of what's going on with housing across our country? Is it harder for people? Are we seeing a trend back to the 60s and 70s when we had to pass federal housing laws to even show houses or show neighborhoods to people from certain ethnicities? Is that what's going on here? Or is this just a pricing level that is not letting younger millennials live in diverse areas? I mean, is everybody going to their own neighborhoods because that's what they can afford? And this is an economic issue more than it is wanting to live around a certain group of people? I guess that's what it all doesn't make sense, right? I mean, as you put this all, as you read those numbers.
How can the views be one thing, but the reality of where they're living be another?
Exactly. There's got to be something missing there that's not being addressed in the study. Because if I've got no problems and I've got no hangups, then why am I living with my ethnic group in greater numbers than ever before, than in the last 20 years?
Well, yeah.
Okay. Well, for millennials, it's and then ever before, because that's all they know is the last 20 years. That is their history.
It's old man rant day, folks. See, and we chose these. We thought we weren't going to get the blood pressure.
No, I know, but well, I had a disagreement with some. What are 18-year-olds?
Those would be Gen Z.
Who the best player of all time was, and I was arguing with 18-year-olds, and they only knew people that had only been playing for the last 15 years. It was like, well, the sport's been going on for over 100. Oh, but I don't know any of those people, so they probably weren't any good because I don't know them. And it's like, okay, whatever. So it's this whole thing about, history is mine. And my youngest daughter, God bless her, one time was 4 years old and strumming a guitar, and she said, "I know that I know what I know, and sometimes I guess." And that's kind of what I feel like.
That's kind of what I feel like
with these younger generations.
Okay.
It's like they know what they know, and by God, this is the only time it's ever happened because that's all they know about. Well, it went on here. Oh, I don't know about that, so it's not real.
No, I mean, to your point, though, I think the article basically comes up with, two possibilities. One is that it could be that some people still don't embrace diversity as much as they profess in surveys.
See, and right.
In other words,
and that's where I was headed.
They don't feel, and this is a bigger cultural question, right? That people don't feel comfortable even in an anonymous survey because of societal views, admitting that maybe they're taking a view that they don't actually fully feel because they feel like they're supposed to say a certain thing. So that's a possibility. The other one, right, is that many white Gen Xers and the now elder millennials moved into affordable, racially diverse neighborhoods in central cities. By the time young millennials moved in, those same neighborhoods were less affordable and less diverse. In the most expensive cities, young adults might have relatively little choice in where they can afford to live.
And that's exactly what that said it better than I did. But I'm thinking of going to some of the bigger cities where I go to. The revamping of downtown and things have risen property values to the level that young millennials
you're not going to afford them.
Can't afford to live there. So does that mean that I'm inherently racist because I don't try to go live there? I mean, to the point of I'm not as diverse as I think I am, because I think I'm very liberal and very diverse in my views towards marriage and friendships and where I would live and who my neighbors are. I'm open to anybody.
Well, we bought our house in 2017, right? And I'm just thinking back as you're talking about this too, what were we thinking about when we bought the house?
And going into the next segment, mine was location. I wanted to get out of the city, our city of 10,000. I didn't want to be in the city of 10,000. So I moved out, and I made sure that I had acreage around me and trees and no neighbors. Because that's what I wanted.
I want to be a grumpy old man.
At 30, I wanted to be a grumpy old man.
I've always been a grumpy old man.
Exactly. Nothing changed.
It's in my bones.
That's where I want to live,
Well, but I don't think it was. I don't recall it being any kind of consideration for Brett or I.
No, you picked it because it was a fair price and a cheap contract, and it was something you all could afford coming back from Cincinnati.
And it was, honestly,
it was a good deal. It wasn't necessarily, I don't think you necessarily really like, no, I don't know how many of your neighbors listen. I don't think you really like your neighborhood. I think you just got a good deal on a place to live that allowed you to do other things.
Yeah.
If you had your druthers, would you move out of that neighborhood?
Yeah.
I thought so. I know some of your neighbors. I wouldn't live there for all the money in the world.
No. Some of the neighbors are, I'd be okay being further away from them. And all of our,
and just so everybody knows,
every one of our neighbors is white. Just for the record,
I was going to say,
none of them
ethnicity has nothing to do with it.
We are not in a diverse neighborhood, and I would still gladly choose something else. But it is that, and this is what we're talking about in the next segment. The timing of when we bought is very relevant now to, even though we could probably afford to move someplace else, that doesn't mean it would be wise, because we look at when we bought into the housing market and where things are at now, it's like, that'd be crazy. So in today's housing market, it's timing over location, according to a Wall Street Journal article. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. Anyone on the hunt for a new house lately has learned a hard truth about real estate. This is according to the Wall Street Journal. The only thing more important than location is timing. Mortgage rates surged so much and so quickly in 2022 that those who bought homes mere months apart are now on starkly different financial paths. Some buyers' good fortune to lock in historically low rates could pay off for decades and impact their life choices. Many late to the market have shifted from having a fear of missing out to actually missing out. Mortgage rates initially dropped after the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. They later jumped as the Fed began a series of rate hikes in March 2022 to address inflation. Fed officials signaled earlier this month that they might be finished raising rates for now. The average rate for a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage is currently 6.39%, according to Freddie Mac. The typical monthly payment on a median-priced existing single-family home nearly doubled in 2 years' time, rising from $1,033 in June 2022 to $1,933 in June of 2022.
I don't want to interrupt you because I know you've got more to say, but I want people to listen to that, especially the older listeners, because I don't think you understand, unless you have millennial children who are looking for homes, you're not recognizing that. I know both my daughters are getting pushback from Gen Z. Is it Gen Z? No, Gen X. Which is it?
Gen X is before them. Gen Z is after us.
They're getting pushback from the Gen X and the boomers, like, you should be buying a home. You're in your 30s. You know, I mean, you should, this is the time. And then my daughters start to explain to them the housing market. And they're like, oh, I didn't realize that. So before you start, casting aspersions and throwing rocks at glass houses, understand, if you're an older person, it's right now, the economics of buying a house is not like anything you saw when you were growing up. Okay. Now, it is if you're a boomer like me and remember your parents buying a house. Because my parents back in the early 70s bought their first house when I was becoming a teenager, and it was 6 or 7% was the interest rate. So it's not like, again, I ranted about knowing history. This is not unprecedented for interest rates to be this high, but in the last 30 years it is. And so the prices, think about if you had to pay that kind of price now for your house, okay? Because that's what these young people who are at the lower levels of their earning power right now have to do. And that's the one thing I remember about buying my house is I knew when I bought it, it was going to take more of my budget than it would later, because I knew being a teacher, I had built-in salary increases coming. But you don't know that now in today's economic market, that you're going to have those built in. You hope you do, right? But it's a scary time to be looking as you enter the workforce and start to earn some of your peak earning years, and then look at, like what you said, almost double the cost of the mortgage for the same house. Not to talk about how much the price goes up, but just by the interest rate being doubled or tripled over the last 2 years. And I don't think we stop as the older generations to respect some of the struggles that younger people are going through, because we just go off of our experience and saying, well, why is it so hard? Go ahead and do this. So, give us some thought here as Justin continues. And because it is not the same house buying experience that we all had 30 years ago.
Yeah, remember, here it is again. The typical monthly payment on a median-priced existing single-family home nearly doubled in 2 years, from June of 2020 to June of 2022. It went from $1,033 a month to $1,933 a month.
And it's holding steady, folks. I can tell you that.
Yeah. I guess part of what I would point out there is, again, millennial. We bought our house in 2017, a 3% mortgage rate, and we thought that was great. I mean, we were glad that we got it. We would have liked to have done a little better. I mean, who doesn't always want to do better? But you really get perspective now of, that's what I was saying in the last segment of, could we afford something else? Yeah, because we could probably make one of those higher payments if we really wanted to. But I mean, just being honest with our listeners, our required monthly payment is like $700, and we're in a existing medium price single family home for this area. That's what we bought. It was built in 2005, right? So it's less than 20 years old.
Well, why don't you sell it? Because, you could sell it for twice as much and you couldn't find something equitable with the new money that you had.
Where are we going to go?
Right.
Now that we
And that's where I am, right? I'm looking to get out of my house and move.
Yeah.
And that's the trouble that I'm having is, my house is worth a whole lot more than I paid for it.
But then you're going to pay.
But I'm still going to have to come up with
for
another $100,000 to get in a home basically equal to mine, plus paying a 6% interest rate.
Right.
Where I'm currently at a 3% rate, like you, 3.25%. Actually, I'm almost all paid off, right? So why would I move? And even if I want to downsize, I'm going to pay more for a house that's smaller on a smaller piece of land than what I have now. That's my conundrum. And I'm going to have to start making a monthly payment when I don't have one right now. It makes it tough because I'm going to throw you for a loop, Justin, but I really want you to listen to this. I'm supposedly one of the people that are stopping young people from buying a home because I'm not leaving my home. My home should be for a young family. It's way too big for what I need. But I can't sell it and then turn around and buy something smaller for less than what I would get for what I sold my house. So I have a bigger house on property, but because of location, I can sell it, but then I can turn around and that's only going to be a down payment on a smaller house where I want to go live.
It's our expectations of what we want too. I think about like the senior housing that went in here. One of the reasons that they were pushing that is they were talking about that very thing, which is you have to get people who are in their retirement living in larger houses or single family homes out of single family homes, because they're taking up housing that could be available to those first time families. They keep the market tight. So the other thing though is if you've owned a home your whole life and you have it paid off, it can be really hard too to convince those people that the right move is to now go rent something rather than buy, because you get used to owning, and it benefited you financially. Well, isn't that backwards? I'm retired now and I'm going to go rent something rather than own. Well, if you don't have plans to pass it on, right, as part of wealth, then that's also one of those things to think about. It's, well, if I sold my home and I have all this cash, I could afford to rent. There's no down payment. I could afford to rent for
probably, how many months, right?
Right. For probably, a good portion of the next decade or more just off of having sold it. And that doesn't count retirement or Social Security or anything like that. Like I'm just going to use the cash So I think some of that too is, I don't know how good of a job we do as a society as some of this stuff is shifted at reworking our perceptions as a society about what is right to do when, generally speaking, people, you rent until you can buy and then you buy and then you die, like that's, that's the chain of progression. And maybe it shouldn't be.
That's an interesting point.
Another problem is house hunters' buying power has declined significantly. So we've talked about the monthly payment going up, but that means a decrease in buying power. In August of 2021, the highest priced home that a median income household could afford with an average mortgage rate peaked at $593,000, according to an analysis from First American. So almost $600,000 for the highest priced home that a median income household could afford at an average mortgage rate. That figure, which assumes a down payment of 20%, plummeted to a recent low of $387,000 in October of 2022.
Because you say, well, 20%, 380, that's only, like $78,000. Okay, you've got closing costs, you've got this, you've got that. So when you get there, you're usually going to need $100,000 in cash laying around just to make a down payment to get your financing at $300,000. You're going to have to pay a mortgage at 6% on $300,000.
For home buyers, it's as if they took a bathroom break during a game of Monopoly to find that every price on the board had nearly doubled when they came back. I know it seems like, well, surely that's the end of the problems in home buying, right? Well, no. We also have to talk about the median numbers of days that a house remained on the market. And then we also have to look at the long-term difference that this has on Americans, the financial impact that it has long-term if you bought now versus having been delayed, if that's what you were wanting to do. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back.
I'm going to start here, Justin, by saying my wife called about 2 houses last week that she had just seen that had popped up on her feed, and both of them were under contract already. And she just saw them that morning. She woke up, first thing she does, she looks at them, she called about them, because, oh, these look nice. Let's go see them. And the real estate agent said, well, they're both under contract. I was like, wait. And she goes, well, I just saw it this morning at 8 o'clock. She goes, yeah, I know. That's just the market.
Yeah. Yep. Done. Sold.
I mean, so how do you, even if you decide to bite the bullet, right? And buy, look, you want to buy, you've been pre-approved at 6.25, whatever the current rate is now. You've got the 20% down. How do you even find a place, right? I mean, I think that's what you're getting ready to talk about is, and that's just anecdotal, but it's like, I've got the money, I've got this, I've got that. It's like, and the number one question we got with a real estate agent, and she said, well, do you have to sell your house to buy this one? And we said, no. And she said, okay, well, I can probably find you something.
Right. But if you have to sell it,
if you have to sell yours first, there's no way. I can't do anything for you.
Yep.
Unreal. But anyway, go ahead. I just wanted to start with that because that's the kind of stuff that we're dealing with.
Per the National Association of Realtors, the median number of days that a house was on the market, typically 30 to 40 days in 2019, dropped to the low 20s in 2020 and into the teens in 2021 and 2022. The difference in having bought a home now versus a few years ago could hit Americans' wallets for decades to come, according to economists. Now, you might think, well, refinancing down the line could help, but it likely won't come close to closing or erasing that gap.
No, because the first 5 years you're making your house payment is almost, I don't know.
It's mostly interest.
It is almost all interest, right? So you're paying most of your interest out before you have a chance to refinance.
A hypothetical buyer who purchased a house in June of 2020 for $300,000, roughly the median price for existing single-family homes at the time, with a 20% down payment and a 3% mortgage rate. So this is kind of a very standard June 2020 purchase, right? Would pay about $89,000 in interest over the first 15 years of a 30-year loan. That's according to calculations by Andy Carswell, a professor of consumer economics at the University of Georgia. Now let's compare that. Remember that $89,000 in interest over the first 15 years. By comparison, someone who bought at the same price in June of 2022, the same price, right, which unlikely, with a 6% mortgage rate, would pay about $190,000 in interest over the first 15 years.
More than double.
And then if we continue this, if interest rates dropped such that the 2022 buyer were able to refinance at 5% 5 years after their purchase, that number, instead of being $190,000, would go down to $168,000. But still, astronomically higher.
$70,000 that you could have had to pay off something else, to buy something else, or to make improvements on your property. I mean, that just the difference in interest savings. You're not talking about your salary going up or inheriting money or anything else. You're just paying that much extra to just live there. I mean, that's twice the interest. I mean, that's almost twice the payment.
So Jeffrey Zabel, an economics professor at Tufts University, co-wrote a study in 2020 saying that renters who bought into the relatively stable housing market between 1989 and 1999 built more wealth in the following years and decades due to home price appreciation than those who bought into the more turbulent market between 2001 and 2007, according to that 2020 study. But purchasing during any particular year in one of those periods wasn't more advantageous than purchasing during the others in the span of time. Buyers who missed out on the lower prices and rates earlier in the 2020s say it is something hard not to focus on what might have been.
And while that's true, I guess as we're getting ready to wrap up today, my question to you, Justin, is none of these people say, well, what do we tell those people who are out there like my daughters who are still wanting to buy and looking to buy? And A, there's not that much to choose from. B, it's not going to be open for that much long. And C, it's going to be super expensive.
Yeah, I mean, Lance nor I obviously are financial experts, but I just share my own experience of, I guess I would say if you're out there and you're listening and if you have the money for a down payment, that's a huge caveat, right? I mean, if you ain't got the money for a down payment, then it's kind of a moot point because you don't have a choice anyway. I guess what I'm looking at is just the data from this article, right? You're saying, okay, well, you're spending $1,900 a month for a medium priced home. Obviously, that's super rough because, hard to say. But if we look at apartment prices, if you were going to rent the equivalent thing, you'd be paying more than that. Now, that's not always true, right? Because it depends on the market you're in. But if we're just playing off of these regular numbers, rents have become so crazy that for that same thing, if you were going to 1-for-1 rent the thing, you'd probably, I'd be surprised if you got into it for less than $2,500 a month. So even with real estate taxes, homeowners insurance, everything you have to do to take care of the property, you'll still be building equity in something and your money will still be, you're going to get something back. Would you get as much back as if you had bought 3 years ago? No, you're going to get a lot less back, but you are going to get something back. If you pay these astronomically high rents, you don't get anything from that. So I don't know. I guess I lean toward, you have to look at your market individually because it's not always true everywhere. But I mean, I would be crazy to go rent something right now. You know what I mean? That it would be, I could not find a financial advisor probably on the face of the earth that would say that's a wise thing for me to do.
But that's because you own something currently.
Because I already own something. At the same time, if I was sitting on what I needed for a down payment, which I'm not, but if I was, I'd probably try to buy, but I'd be stuck. I mean, that's I guess the sad thing of this, right? If I did not have, and I was paying these types of rents, I mean, I don't know how you do it.
Well, and that's why we're talking about it, is because we're trying to make those people that aren't in this situation aware of what these young people are struggling with. I mean, that's my point.
The only way I think you get it done, Lance, is we have to change. And I know there's a reason we have the rules we have now about mortgage lending, right? We did a lot of this in reaction to the mistakes that we made in the early 2000s that led to a lot of them that led to the crash, right? High risk lending, no money down, all kinds of things that created an environment of highly risky, highly speculative lending that led to a whole bunch of people not being able to make their payments. At the same time, we've now created a bar that makes it very difficult, even for well-educated, young working professionals to be able to buy a home. And like we've said when we've had this before, either we have to say that owning a home is not a fundamental part of building the American dream anymore, and therefore we have to redefine that, or we have to say we have to make it easier. We have to, not easier, we have to make it possible for people in that situation to buy. One of the ways you do that is I think you reduce the down payment requirements. 20% down is insane. But I would think that people like, your daughters who are struggling with, do I buy, do I not buy? Because things are crazy. Why should they have to come up with 20%? Why? I mean, they have stable jobs, they have stable careers, they're making decent money. Why should I have to come up with that? I'm paying these crazy high rents. As a financial institution, it should make sense to me that they can make this payment. This payment for their house might be equal to or less than what they're renting for. Just the basic math of they should be able to make this.
You're not taking a risk on people like that because
they're in stable careers.
Right.
Right. I don't know. It seems like a pretty safe investment, but it's not really the financial institution. It's in most cases, they have rules in place where if I'm going to get a mortgage that I want to be able to sell, which most financial institutions want to be able to do,
right,
I can't lend more than 20% of value of the purchase price. So it doesn't matter what your purchase price is. I can't give you more than that and sell your mortgage. So we have to either incentivize financial institutions to keep the mortgages and not sell them, or we have to change that threshold so that it's easier to purchase your house without such a large down payment. So why do we have this conversation today, Lance?
Well, because we're concerned about young people and want things to happen better for them, but mostly because True Chat has a mission. I guess that's always the number one reason, is because we want to keep our jobs. And so the mission here at True Chat, well, true.
Depends on the day.
Right. But the mission here at True Chat is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And so hopefully we've done that today. You've learned something, or people that are in that same situation and you feel for them, or now you understand it and you can maybe do something about it. But as you talk to your family and friends, tell them if they think this is something they'd like to listen to, that they can find us as a podcast on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us releases new episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays. First thing in the morning as a podcast. Those same episodes heard on the weekends on AM and FM radio stations across the United States, parts of Canada. For The State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I do know that I am Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch. And thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.